podcast. I am Urza Master. Joining me, as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Cilium Maz. And today we are live from the Jedi Council chambers for a very special event. It is the 25th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And as you may remember, we have a myriad of discussions on this program where we've touched upon the first episode of the Star Wars universe, and there are some varying opinions on this film, and it has often been controversial, sometimes lauded, sometimes roasted. But we've got three Jedi on this council, and three Jedi with things to say. So today, we'll kick it off with Jedi Master Cilium, some background, some tidbits of information you may not know, and then we're going to do a retrospective on 25 years of The Phantom Menace, what we felt at the time, what we were feeling over those 24 years, and what we're looking forward to in a future episode when we do a full retrospective analysis. But today, you're going to get the background, you're going to get our feelings to date, and then we'll revisit it in the future and see if any of our opinions change. Something very brand new for the Graying Jedi, not unlike what's going on in the Star Wars universe right now. So Jedi Master Cilium, take us away to a galaxy far, far away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jedi Master, Urza Master. Thank you, Jedi Master, Lord Uther. And thanks to everybody who is actually tuning in right now as we speak, live and in stereo. Turn down your lights where applicable. If you're not catching us on the live, make sure you're going to watch us anyway, because the same mistakes we'll make here for the next few minutes will be captured for posterity right here on this feed. So you definitely don't want to miss the Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace edition of The Graying Jedi. And yes, let's start with something that Jedi Master Urza Master has alluded to. This film came in with a tidal wave of anticipation, expectation, and sheer raw fan passion. And there were certain segments of the audience, I count myself amongst those, who were swept up in that wave and fully wrapped their arms around it from the jump. There were others who were put off by some of the elements, story decisions, artistic choices. And there were some that just skipped it and decided to see Disney's Tarzan that same summer, which inspired its very own playhouse in the Walt Disney Kingdoms. But we're going to stay focused on the first two categories here.
Wait, this is
Go ahead.
atypical, but if I may interject, I think this is
Please.
actually a good spot to start the discussion. Before we get into too much detail and background, we were all there at the time when they announced they're doing a new Star Wars. Uther, what were you feeling when you heard Star Wars was coming back?
Well, I think everyone, well, I was excited like any other Star Wars fan. The thought of a prequel was, I'm probably in that group where I was not 100% on board with that, unless it was going to be, which this might be jumping ahead in the conversation, who was going to be Vader hunting down the Jedi, which is what we had heard in the movies, right? So to go all the way back, which, again, I know we're probably going to get into this in a second, but to go as far back as they did, I was excited, but I did have some trepidations about what might happen. So that's kind of where I was at with that. But of course, I mean, the idea that we were going to see Star Wars on the big screen again, what else could you ask for as a Star Wars fan? Except for maybe a good story. But anyway.
Well, without jumping too far ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I was a kid at the time. So for me, this was going to be my first, other than the re-releases, my first opportunity to see a brand new Star Wars film in theaters, with my friends, and go from like just playing with the toys and inventing our own Star Wars stories or reading the books. There was the Star Wars Club at the time, so like you got a choose your own adventure book, and you could go and you could be the Wookiee or you could be the Jedi. that Luke was going to train. So this was pretty big from a child's perspective at the time. I didn't know what this movie was going to be about. I had no preconceived notions of what it should be. All we knew is it was going to tell a story before the Star Wars we knew and loved. So I was absolutely beside myself stoked. Knew nothing of what was going to happen next. So for me, this was like opening Pandora's box in a good or a bad way. Jedi Master Silly Maz, how about you? And then I swear I'll let you get back to what you're saying.
Oh, not at all. No. And in fact, for this special broadcast of the Graying Jedi, uh, should I bring something to the forefront that requires immediate rebuttal or confirmation, please, by all means, just go ahead and jump right in. It's a free-spirited discussion. It's almost as if we were sitting in the cantina in Mos Eisley, enjoying, a frosty mug there in the corner booth, hoping Greedo doesn't slide up and ask us to repay our debts to Jabba the Hutt. So, not to give too long and concerted the psychological aspects of this, but Star Wars was the first film that I can recall seeing as a boy. I was 4 years old in 1977, and it's the first tangible, concrete memory I have of a movie theater, of a movie, of what any of that was about. I don't have memories of 101 Dalmatians or Sleeping Beauty or the Apple Dumpling Gang or anything else that may have come prior to. Star Wars is my first impression, and to my credit here, many years later, I can still recall sensory images of that very first screening in San Francisco. Like, I can't tell you exactly what I did for those 2 hours, but I can still close my eyes and see elements of that screening. So from 4 years old to about 10 years old, 10 or 11, I was in that first original trilogy's wave. Episode 4, A New Hope. Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. And then, as we do when we graduate out of the fourth or fifth grade and start to get into our teenage years, suddenly what was once cool with action figures and sand people and toys and so forth, suddenly we put those childish things aside and we start developing love affairs with all sorts of new things, like girls or boys or our pets. And my tastes changed. And I suddenly became into horror movies and John Carpenter and David Cronenberg and Wes Craven. And then as we got into high school and out of high school, suddenly I was obsessed with David Lynch and surrealistic Twin Peaks and his film working. And then I went to film school at USC, and suddenly I was obsessed with all these classic films from John Ford and Martin Scorsese and so on. And so little by little, I brought all these new experiences within. And somewhere along those lines, probably right around when I left high school, I fell in love with Star Wars again. Only this time now I wasn't 4 years old. I was in my early 20s. And it never really left me since then. And I've just been a devotee and a faithful Jedi, basically, since for about 30 plus years now. And when I knew that it wasn't just a rumor, that George Lucas was going to step back behind the camera and assemble an all-star team to bring Episode 1 to life, yeah, I think we can take Ursa Master's initial gleeful reaction and just compound it exponentially. Like, to me, there was going to be no other experience in 1999 or anything that came before or after. Forget James Cameron's Titanic. This was going to be like, the picture. I remember when the first trailer came out, it was attached to Adam Sandler's The Waterboy. And I remember paying premium prices for a ticket to Adam Sandler's The Waterboy and then never seeing that picture. If you ask me today what happened in The Waterboy, I only know from a really bad trailer of it from 1998. but I watched that Star Wars trailer. I paid for $15 for it, basically, and it was worth every nickel when that came out in the fall of 1998 to get ready for the summer of 1999. And in fact, today is the release date on Star Wars Wednesday, May 19th, 1999 was the first time it unspooled worldwide, United States, Canada, and beyond. Now, funny story. I had actually seen Phantom Menace 3 days earlier, on May 16th, 1999. It was a Sunday. The picture opened on a Wednesday. I saw it the Sunday before it opened. My parents, mom and dad, Doug and Karen, they surprised me and my writing partner at the time from USC, Pete Svab. They surprised us and purchased 2 charity tickets to the Phantom Menace. And it was to go towards the Boys and Girls Club of America, and the screening was in San Francisco, George Lucas's, stomping grounds. So we drove up, Pete and I think the night before, which would have been the 15th. Spent the night. My parents, we got a hotel room, whatever. And then we went to this screening, which was technically almost the premiere, if you will. And they did these charity screenings in major cities across the U.S. They did them in Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, what have you. But so, they gave us lanyards, to get in and stuff. You've got people on the street taking photographs. Entertainment Tonight's there, and Access Hollywood is there, and you've got all these, local celebrities from San Francisco, Benjamin Bratt from Law and Order and so forth, I think was in the audience, and, or a couple of good-looking actresses, that were, on sitcoms or something. Whoever could get a ticket got a ticket, and so Pete and I were there, and so we saw it about 72 hours before the rest of the world, and we'll talk about that experience at the end, but this has always been sort of near and dear to me, and I consider myself one of those first devotees, and so forth. Because Star Wars, when you think about it, and I think one of the reasons we have the Graying Jedi and our fans, our passionate fans worldwide, it's always more than just the movie, isn't it? There's always more to it than just something you watch in a theater for a couple of hours or on a streamer or a DVD or VHS copy. Like when a Star Wars movie is in theaters and comes out, it's an event. I mean, there's fast food tie-ins with restaurants, so you have commercials and merchandise. At the time, we still had something called Toys R Us, which had action figures and play sets and Legos and all of the things that we remember when we were children and first introduced to Star Wars. You have, T-shirts and pajama bottoms in Target and Walmart. You have the soundtrack. You have CDs and vinyl, and so it's always the magazines. You've got Empire magazine with their special 32-page all-color spread. You've got the book novelizations. You've got posters. It's a sum of all that creates this larger than life adventure, in your mind. And that can be hard to live up to for some fans, obviously, and we may hear about that in a few moments. But that's, to me, like, I get caught up in that, right? Because, like I say, it's not just going to see the Garfield movie on the weekend, taking the kids to see that. This is something. This is special. This is elite. This is top of the line. So, on May 19th, 1999, writer-director George Lucas returned to the saga that he launched in 1977 on May 25th. This is the first time he's behind the director's chair since A New Hope. Empire Strikes Back, of course, was directed by his USC professor, Irving Kershner, and Return of the Jedi was also helmed by different directors and so forth. He contributed to the scripts, but he was not himself behind the camera. He brought along with him Rick McCallum, the producer, And he had met Rick McCallum when they worked together on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles for television for ABC. And what all they did there was shoot a television series on 35 countries on high definition video for a network, which at the time was unheard of. And it was McCallum's ability to manage that circus and be able to pull all of that off, the infrastructure necessary to create that show, that brought him into George's orbit. And he was the producer on the special editions, which Ursa Master referenced. There were the big screen re-releases with modified special effects and extra scenes in 1997. And now here we are 2 years later in 1999 with all new material. This was Lucasfilm had done one film before the special editions and after Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in 1989. And it was a little picture called Radioland Murders in 1994. And I urge you just to see it as sort of a curiosity, because it has no ties to any existing IP from George Lucas or Steven Spielberg or any of our childhood dream masters. And judged on its own terms, it's kind of a wacky little radio set comedy, drama, murder mystery, kind of like the movie Clue from 1985. But the reason I bring that up is because it had been 10 years since a proper Lucasfilm release, where we have John Williams doing a soundtrack, and we have ILM doing the special effects, and we have all of these great minds coming together. And so there had been a drought for that type of storytelling, and here it was to fill it in. This was still a 20th Century Fox cash cow. Walt Disney had not acquired Lucasfilm, which they did in 2012. So News Corp and Rupert Murdoch and all of them were the ones who were raking it in. They spent $115 million on the budget, which now sounds quite reasonable. But back then was a little bit eye-opening. Anytime you had triple-digit budgets, the accountants got nervous. It made $431 million in the United States. It was the #1 film of 1999, as you might expect. And overall, it made $924 million across the globe, just shy of $1 billion at the time. Nowadays, a big blockbuster like Barbie or Avatar can gross over $1 billion worldwide. But back then, they were just starting to inch up towards that Great Barrier. And they've just re-released Phantom Menace into theaters 2 weeks ago, and it's made another $20 million in 2 weeks. A 25-year-old film. It's made, it's just sort of adding to its coffers, if you will, still. So for fans who didn't get to see it 25 years ago, who weren't with us 25 years ago, it's a chance to see it on the big screen, and for others to kind of revisit and reimagine how it all was. It featured, I think, one of the most exciting things about any Star Wars project, whether it's Ahsoka or The Acolyte, Obi-Wan, The Mandalorian, and I just named all our streaming shows, but even the sequel trilogies and the prequel trilogies, it's when you have people who want to play in that universe, who you might associate with other roles or other personas, choosing to then become part of the Star Wars galaxy. And so Liam Neeson as your top billed Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn. Here's a guy who, had been working since Excalibur in 1981 and then leapt to international stardom with Schindler's List and Steven Spielberg in 1993. He's going to play a Jedi Master, And Ewan McGregor, this fiery Scottish actor who blew us away with his early work in Danny Boyle films like Shallow Grave and Trainspotting, and he did a memorable guest turn on ER while that was a top NBC show. He's going to play Obi-Wan. He's going to be the young Alec Guinness. You had Natalie Portman. You had Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, and Frank Oz returning. We had Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction playing a Jedi Master. We had Terrence Stamp, General Zod, was going to be in this picture. Keira Knightley. We didn't know who Keira Knightley was. This was one of her first major roles as Sabe, one of Queen Amidala's handmaidens. We had Brian Blessed, who was Hawkman in Flash Gordon. And we even have cameos from Sofia Coppola and Dominique West of The Wire. If you look really hard, they were unnamed Naboo and handmaidens. You had the best ILM art supervisors, visual supervisors that the planet knew at the time. You had John Williams, who recorded his new score, his first new Star Wars music, in decades. He gathered up with the London Symphony Orchestra, and they recorded at Abbey Road, the famous musical recording studio overseas, and delivered. That was one of the most exciting things, I think, for me, was that I had now almost an hour 15 of brand new John Williams notes in music. From, like I said, this is the man that has given us more successful movie music in our lifetimes. Jaws, Harry Potter, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Superman, Close Encounters. I mean, and here it was, we were going to get all new stuff. So yeah, I think that part of me, I felt euphoric, and I felt like it was an out-of-body experience when those famous blue credits, written and directed by George Lucas, produced by Rick McCallum, all showed up. Now, I've had 25 years to think about it, and I think there are some things that Lord Uther is going to share with us that went a different direction from a certain point of view. And I won't defend, or I'm going to try to defend them only in the sense that there was obvious intent as to what was going on, but I will not argue that the execution, depending on how you look at it, there were some things that didn't quite land as successfully, perhaps, as they could have been. There are two things that come to mind, and I'm sure Lord Uther will have his own. The decision to make Anakin a 9-year-old. Remember, this film takes place 32 years before A New Hope. Anakin was born 41 years before New Hope, and so in this picture, he's 9 years old. And that was very controversial for a lot of reasons, and with young Jake Lloyd portraying him in this. And then the decision on how to characterize the sort of the Chewbacca humorous character, if you will, the comic relief, with Ahmad Best as Jar Jar Binks and the Gungans. And I actually have workshopped in my head things that they might have done differently that might have gotten a different response for Jar Jar and the Gungans. Things that they did in the original trilogy that could have still carried over. They went a different direction, and I don't profess to be smarter or more in the know than they were. I've just learned to accept those choices and so forth. And I can acknowledge, even as a super fan, that it's probably an acquired taste, some of that. And it's probably stuff that can seem grating in moments. But I would also argue that over the course of the trilogy and the aging up of Anakin and so forth, and other ancillary things like comic books and other things, I can also say that I think those elements have been addressed, and even in some cases, the initial hard lines sort of blurred and softened, because there were some that marched right out of the theater and said, "I hate this." And I think maybe some of that temperature may have come down in the last 25 years. I certainly hope so, because there's a lot to like in this picture. There's a lot of world building. This is a Star Wars we have never seen before. The original trilogy was deep in the heart of rebellion and the Galactic Empire, and the set designs and everything was very lived in, very grungy, very, a galaxy in decay. And here, for the first time, with the help of ILM and the visual effects, which were pioneering, don't forget, in 1999. Back then, all this stuff was basically right out of the lab and right onto the screen. This was something more noble. something more elegant. Obi-Wan referred to it was a more elegant age. And this was Star Wars royalty and grandeur, from the costumes and the sets and just the visual design of the ships and so forth. This was a completely different era. And I think that is carried through in all of the years to come here, how the galaxy, once looked. And if you go even further back, as we will with the upcoming Acolyte streaming show, that's going to go back another 150 years. So we're going to get even more of that grand Art Deco kind of flavor and feel. So, but I'm curious because I sense Ursa and Uther have some different thoughts on that. Let's see where the discussion takes us.
Well, let's attack your 3 points first, because
Okay.
discuss maybe attack is the wrong word.
No,
I'll
we
put
do
my
attack
X-Wing
of clones.
foils into attack position.
Okay.
We've talked about this before. So let's just start with the young Anakin thing. I don't know. At times, sometimes I don't need to know that much, right? Like, I don't know if I need that much detail about him being bad. And we've also talked about some tropiness. And though it's not really, we don't see it in this film, we'll see it in another one. The way he goes down the dark side is that kind of tropey, which I know Urza Master has kind of talked about tropiness, whatever we want to call it at times, which are valid points. But at that time, if we're looking backwards, maybe
Right.
it did align with that. I've also been thinking about, and I'm going to put this together with Jar Jar. So you have a young Anakin and you've got the Jar Jar character. If you want to appeal to a young generation, so kids that want to get into Star Wars, could you ask for a better way? I mean, this is a kid who is going to have Force-like powers, and there's Jar Jar running around, Misa, Misa, Misa. So you've got all that stuff happening, right? He talks funny, he falls over, and then he winds up kind of being the hero. So I can see the appeal to bring a new or a younger generation in by using those two things. And then I'm just going to throw in, which you didn't bring this up, but the midichlorian thing, if I combine that with Anakin, makes it
That's right.
a million times worse, because we've had this discussion on the Warp Core podcast and the Graying Jedi, which all of you can subscribe to by clicking below.
Please.
The great thing about Star Wars is the mysticism, in my opinion, and the great thing about Star Trek is the explanationism of stuff and the tech side of it, right? And so that's why I don't think I needed all that. I didn't need to know he had this high midichlorian count. I didn't. I don't know if I needed a young Anakin. And then you have to start asking yourself too, what are the chances of these things aligning a certain way? But I guess things sometimes do align like that. So I'm throwing a lot of things out there. But, seeing as because I was 27, we were 26 or 27 or 28 whenever we saw it.
Yeah.
And I actually went with Chris Beck to go see this. In my Jeep Sahara. I have all this in the back of my head. I remember the day. It was nice out. It had the top down. We drove to the AMC theater and saw it there. But let's go to the guy who is the youngin' and see if anything that I said or Jedi Master Silly Ma said that maybe lines up, because how old were you when this was out?
I was, let's see, that was summer of 99. I was
Yep.
10.
Yeah.
Okay, so perfect.
Okay.
This was the perfect age. And yeah, the one thing I will say is, and I don't know if this is just my generation, we were kind of in that early millennial, I guess, the elder millennial generation, where there's a pretty hard split, I feel. In my own class, my own 88ers and 89ers who came together in my grade level, about 50% of us ended up being like real jaded, skeptical, I don't know, buttholes. And the other half were like innocent children that ate everything up. They were the ones that watched SpongeBob and Invader Zim. I was on the side of like, I like South Park and I like the old trilogy more than the new trilogy. But I saw the trailer on my 10th birthday when I went to see The Waterboy with my aunt. She always took me to a movie for my birthday, so I was beside myself excited. I did not have the internet, so I got all of my information like fourth hand from other kids at school. So there was a ton of conjecture flying around about what this new movie was about. I went into it, open minded, or as open minded as one could possibly be. And if there's one constant in my life, I've always hated child actors. Every child actor movie that I saw, I just couldn't stand. I didn't like Big Daddy. I didn't like, um, other than The Goonies, which to me, I don't know, that was like the one that got away. Like I just sort of enjoyed it, and I don't know why. But I didn't like Drew Barrymore and E.T. I didn't like any of those. I didn't like kids in movies. It just wasn't my thing. And so having a 9-year old, who's basically my age, being, and everybody knew who Anakin Skywalker was going to become. So it's like, who is this little kid and why does he talk so weird? Um, the thing that got me was when he brought up to Padme in Watto's shop, the whole "Are you an angel?" bit killed it. I mean, right then and there, I was like, ugh. I was actually on board with Jar Jar. I'm probably one of the few people who got real uppity about this movie that actually liked that character because I understood it. Like it was a comic relief character. It was definitely aimed at appealing to little kids, not my age, but like the young kids, the kindergartners and first graders and second graders are going to see this. Like the kids that were going to buy all the toys and had their parents had the money to buy them the toys. That's who they were appealing to. I loved Obi-Wan. I thought Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan was fantastic. Um, and Qui-Gon and Darth Maul. Um, I really enjoyed the animated graphics. Sort of the new, fresh feeling like computer animation that made these elaborate worlds with all this technology, and it was sleek and shiny. There was a lot of appeal. Um, oh, and I had the Legos. I had the Pod Racer Lego set, which I promptly lost most of the pieces later in life, and now it's donated somewhere and scattered to the winds of Tatooine. But you know, I really liked it. Like I remember going to the theater. It was one of the very few times I ever went to see movies in the theater. It's like I got to go to the movies once a year on my birthday. That was basically it. I can count on one hand all of the movies I saw as a kid. It was like Jurassic Park, Aladdin. No, it was Aladdin, then Jurassic Park, X Men 2, or no, Star Wars Episode 1, X Men 2, and then I think high school I went to see a movie, probably Episode 3. Um, and then I probably saw a handful after that. But like the Lord of the Rings movies, I know I went to see, but I remember taking the city bus with my grandma to see Star Wars Episode 1. And like on like 11 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday or a Thursday or something. Like it had been out a while, so like nobody was in the theater. It was just me. But that was how I could see it. Like it was. God, I remember it was 450 to get in, and this was at a Carmike theater, which I don't think has existed for a
Carmine.
long time. Um, I remember the Coca-Cola commercial that came on beforehand with the big Coke sign that rolled down the coin mech. And I mean, it was an experience. It was something like when I go to see movies now, I don't know, it just feels so routine. And I don't know where this dropped off because, I mean, I think we have to give it a moment because this is a huge, like culturally speaking, this is a huge event that's happening. You've got the theaters that are in their prime, arguably, that stretch of time between what 1990 and probably 20 aught 5 aught 6 aught 7 somewhere in there was the time to go to the theater. And they were still reasonably priced. I think popcorn was like 250 for a large or something. You get the combo for $5 or whatever. Candy, like you couldn't sneak stuff in. It was still a big deal. Um, all that was like, I mean, it's burned in my brain. And I remember sitting there and the thoughts I had were the Gungan character's goofy, but I think he's supposed to be C-3PO. Until, of course, we meet C-3PO, and I'm like, well, why do we now have two C-3POs? I don't understand. But yeah, whatever. I was not hook, line, and sinker on Jar Jar, but I enjoyed him. I got it. I did not care for Anakin. I didn't like his stupid friends. Um, I hated the line. Now this is pod racing. That line just burns me. I know it's in our intro, but man, I just can't stand that line. It's so irritating. Um, but
Like
everything
sand.
else, if you take Anakin Skywalker out of this movie, everything else about it is fantastic. Um, I thought the passing of the torch to Obi-Wan, the fight with Darth Maul was outstanding. You know, the political intrigue of the trade embargo with the robots and the weird viceroy and his trade federation aliens. It was all very cool. And the aliens were kind of hapless, but like you sort of bought into that, the trade viceroy being kind of dumb and like,
And
oh,
being manipulated, right?
yeah,
That's the
like
whole
you
idea.
picked up on that almost instantly. So I was like, okay, like even as a 10-year-old, I was like, all right, you got me. Um, I love the one-liners. I thought they were very clever. You were right about one thing, Master. The trade negotiations were short. I mean, I'm a Star Trek junkie. Those little one-liners, that was right out of William Riker. Like that was awesome. So I guess I came at it from the perspective like I didn't have any expectation. I knew I wasn't going to see Darth Vader. I knew I wasn't going to see Luke Skywalker, but I was going to see Jedi, and I was going to see things I'd never seen. I was going to hear about things I'd only read in books. Um, I'd never seen the comics at that point, so it's like this was a huge deal. But I don't remember feeling let down by it, and that was something that I think a lot of older Star Wars fans who saw it, because we always think about like the Star Wars nerds we saw in South Park, right? Who are like, actually, Anakin Skywalker was not conceived by midi-chlorians and was conceived by the raw force power. The midi-chlorian thing, it was weird, but like it did give me some semblance of like, okay, this is how there can be so many Jedi. Like there was a system. Now, did it need to be midi-chlorians? I think my opinion got colored of this later. And that's where I think, because I'd like to hear how you guys had your opinions colored by others. Because I think I left the theater enjoying it very much. But when I got back to school and everybody had seen it, and now all my friends and I are talking about it, I think that's where opinions really changed. Because people hated Jar Jar Binks. I mean, like, viscerally hated Jar Jar Binks. And I was like, "Boy, I didn't like him necessarily, but I didn't like feel so compelled to like complain about something." And people, it was very divisive on the whole midi-chlorian thing. Like, the Force was supposed to be like, something different. It's not supposed to be blood. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, but I mean, they had to give it something, right? I think where Lucas went wrong with the midi-chlorian thing is that it never got mentioned in the original trilogy. So to add new lore to the canon really pulled something out of it. Like I think we talk about the mysticism. It pulled that kind of, we're accepting what they're telling us at face value out of the equation, and that made it very uncomfortable.
But aren't they messing with that right now? Because if watching the second part of it, or watching Ahsoka, everyone's force sensitive, and now everyone can be almost trained in a sense. So to me, it almost feels like they're tearing all of that apart. Now, I'm going to make a dumb comparison, so live with it. Everyone can dribble a basketball. There's Michael Jordan, who maybe is the Luke Skywalker of whatever, like if that, and then there's Jedi Master Silly Mas. Like those are two different things. They both can play the sport, but one
Absolutely.
person is way more gifted, right, than the other
Yeah.
person. I love you, Aaron.
Oh,
I'm just messing with you, right? Um, But so I mean, if that's kind of what they're saying now, the thing is, I might have been okay with that if you're not bringing up that it's this midichlorian thing because, well, unless everyone has midichlorians, right? Is that what they're saying? So
So,
I have one midichlorian, or
yep. Time out on that with the Ahsoka node, with the young stable boy at the end of Last Jedi. It was a controversial reaction, but I don't think in George Lucas's mind, based on interviews and everything that they're there, the Force was always supposed to have some sort of biological component. It was never just supposed to be this literal like wind or mysticism that just hung in the air. And to your question, I believe that everyone has in his mind in how he envisioned this, everyone has these things, these tiny microscopic symbiotic parasitic things in them. And it's the Jedi or the Sith or whomever with the highest concentrations of this in their natural bloodstreams or their biological what have you. They're the ones who end up climbing the ladder of force sensitivity and awareness. Now, Ursa mentions that this wasn't coming up in the original trilogy. Now I'm going to put on my Jedi Council hat for the deep dive here. Again, all traces of the Jedi, thanks to the Inquisitors and the Empire and everything else, have basically been wiped free. And there are no, I mean, we have basically Obi-Wan, the last of that Jedi that we know of, telling Luke in Episode 4, all the exposition he needs to get him to go save the princess and stand up to evil. I don't know if introducing that concept and how the Force works, if you will, would have held up as strongly in that original trilogy. So naturally, when you have a chance to go back and expand and dive deeper, this was their solution. Again, it didn't work for everybody, but that was the solution. There was such an outcry from school children and disillusioned 26-year-olds that they downplayed it for a while, but now we have Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni sort of trying to, again, rehabilitate what George Lucas's intentions were all along, which is to say that they are important, they do play a role in the Force, and I think we're going to see that further cemented in this announced upcoming big screen Star Wars tale from James Mangold, which is literally Jedi Prime, as it's now being referred to, or Dawn of the Force, or Origin of the Force, or Birth of the Force. I think this biological angle may even come more to the forefront, at least to show its origins. And then at that point, it just becomes a part of established cultural lore.
do
So
both
yes,
of you
Eric,
feel
I
like
think
you need
Michael
to know
Jordan
that?
has a lot of M count, and I don't. And that's how he kind of tried to want to do this. But I can see how people might be, like at first, like, wait a minute. I just thought you held up your hand and closed your eyes and you could, move your lightsaber across the room. Like, he was always trying to go deeper, and maybe it just, people had associated it more with maybe a spiritual component, perhaps even a little bit of religious significance, almost like, performing miracles. And he was trying to make it a little more secular, maybe, and again, trying to just come up with a more. But to Ursa's point, Star Trek has always tried to lean into the science side of things, even if some of it's crazy. And that might not have been the best playground for Star Wars to tiptoe out into, because it's always been about legends, lore, mythology, mysticism, as Uther put it, and that's where it feels at its strongest. Maybe not the hard science. This is not a Stephen Hawking. We crossed every T. We did all the research. Kind of a
So
doesn't
Urza,
give.
now I'm thinking about what you said. If we're way off course here, but I don't care. I'm thinking about what you said about if we would have seen it in the original trilogy or had the mention of it, would it have mattered? And I'm going to say yes. And here's why I'm going to say yes. That original trilogy is so foundational, or maybe it's because I'm an old man, whatever. But to me, it's so that's your original foundation, right? And so, and I'm comparing it to Star Trek. we've got Star Trek, but was there enough of a gap between the series and the movie? Because we make references in the Warp Core about, oh, this changed, or this didn't play out that way, or whatever. But is that okay because there was such a large gap? Whereas with the original trilogy, you could get your hands on the VHS tapes and watch them to the point that they literally are coming apart. And so there really is no gap from the original to the prequels to whatever you want to call happened after that. And so just, I won't, whatever. I call him Bantha Doo Doo, but whatever. So, so is that why is that why I have this issue? Because I'm trying to think, if I would have heard this in the original series and maybe Ben just out of nowhere would have talked about Luke's midichlorian count for some reason. I mean, maybe would that have made a difference? That's what I'm trying to figure out. So you guys can address that. I'm going to ask you one more question, which I was, apologies to Silly Moss because I was interrupting him, but
not at all.
Do you need to know the origin of the Force? Because now I feel like I'm going back. This is all tied together to this, believe it or not, for all of our fans out there. This brings me back to the whole thing of, did I need to see Anakin as a kid? Do I need that information? Do I need to see how the Force starts? Because I don't know if I need to know that, because is that TMI? So you guys can address either one you want first.
Let me do Anakin, Ursa. When you go first, but let me take the Anakin. I do have a point on that.
Well, I'm going to try and tackle all of them actually, and then I'm curious to hear Cilia Moss's thoughts on this as well. But to go back to midi-chlorians, it feels very L. Ron Hubbard, which I think is why I didn't care for it, because it sounds like your body's full of thetans, and one side is trying to purge, and the other side is trying to lean into Sith versus Jedi.
This is why I love talking to you, just so you know that. But anyway, keep going.
And I'm not attacking Scientologists out there per se. I have my opinions on that. But if that's your thing, that's your thing, and I'm not going to take away your thing. I think we have to go back to Joseph Campbell, though, because you do not have Star Wars if you do not have Joseph Campbell. Plain and simple. Nope. George Lucas is just a dude with some wacky ideas without Joseph Campbell. And I think Joseph Campbell, who I believe was dead at the time that these movies were being written and put together, I think he would have said that adding in a science aspect takes away the mysticism, and that's going to alienate a certain percentage of your audience just because you're now explaining their religion. And I mean this as no affront to religious folks, but I think any time that a religious person is confronted with information that conflicts with their beliefs, it makes them uncomfortable. And this is not a judgment statement or anything like that, but it certainly does explain why folks didn't buy in universally hook, line, and sinker to this midi-chlorian ideas. And maybe Lucas had no concept. I find it hard to believe, but maybe he had no concept of how closely people followed the religion of Star Wars, of the Jedi, because, Obi-Wan was referred to as a wizard. He's referred, as a hokey religion, in terms of the Force. That's what it was. Whether there was a science aspect to it or not really was irrelevant. And I do think when you add too much detail, it borders on too much information, and that can undo a lot of the power of what we're seeing. And I think of Schindler's List, really great example for our friend Qui-Gon Jinn here. We probably didn't have all the details on what Oskar Schindler did from just the movie. There's probably a lot more amazing, great things he did. But at what point do you get so deep into somebody's life story that it starts to undermine the magic? Because Oskar Schindler saved a bunch of lives. That's fantastic. I mean, amazing story, wonderful flick. But what if, and I bring this up for a reason, what if in studying for this role, Liam Neeson discovers, or Spielberg discovers, that somewhere in Oskar Schindler's life there was some very economic reason, he wanted to make money and he knew he could do this, and it just incidentally helped save a bunch of lives. Does that make it less awesome and cool what he did? Kind of. If that was truly like, if we found out that was his only real motivation and it just so happened to save lives, it's like, well, it's still really great what he did. Yeah, it is. And the Force is still really great if it has something to do with some sort of tiny microscopic parasite that lives in all of us. It's still cool, but it's not as cool. And that's where, it kind of runs a little roughshod because, you know, but and I'm forecasting a bit here to our follow up when we revisit watching this movie in the future. But I think about it now from the perspective of how do you identify a force sensitive? Well, of course, in a world like Coruscant, in a situation like the Jedi were in this era, for as long as they had been this revered council, this far-reaching galactic organization, they had to have something. And to be honest, you can't really rely on the Force. It's like using a divining rod to find water. Does it work sometimes? Yeah. Does it work all the time? Absolutely not, because it's hokey. So, I get it. Like, I think in age and in time and reflection, I've come to hate the idea of midi-chlorians a little less. I do think it stole some of the magic, but to get to your point about what they're doing now in Ahsoka and other shows, I do think they're kind of reviving the idea of the mystic roots in that, maybe it's not your M count that really matters. Maybe we thought it was, but it turns out that the Force is a little bit stronger than that because it flows through us, it penetrates us, it's all around us. And it's getting back to Yoda's evaluation of the Force, which probably leads Qui-Gon and Yoda and Obi-Wan and eventually Anakin to that Force Ghost realm where they've now discovered, like, hey, actually, it's not about little bugs in your veins. It's something greater and deeper and more mystic. If that's what Filoni is doing, and I really hope it is, I think they're achieving something here that I didn't think was possible in somehow rehabilitating the whole midi-chlorian thing. That's where, you worry about too much information. Now it's like, well, but if you keep dumping more information on top of it, you can obfuscate and obscure it to the point where it's like, wait a minute, this is sort of buried in it's like rewriting the Bible in 50 different versions. You lose some details along the way. It's still basically the same, but now it's kind of mystical again. So that's kind of my thought on that. But I do think, in terms of Anakin and in terms of this new origin of the Force movie, I'm curious to see what the origin was. That'll sell me on it. I do think I didn't need to see Anakin as a 9-year-old. I think I needed to see Anakin get discovered, and then probably Anakin as a teenager, where he's training as a Jedi, falling in love with Padme. I will say Natalie Portman in this movie and Jake Lloyd, the age gap makes the next two films really weird. And that has not aged well, in my opinion. But Celia must take us away.
So, yeah, I mean, as it turns out, when we rejoin Anakin in episode 2, it's 10 years after Phantom Menace, and he's then a strapping young buck of 19. But to your point, yes, in this one, that is a little bit more of a gap. But the thing I want to say to both of you, and here is the thing that I've had 25 years to kind of think about. I accept at face value George Lucas's instincts for giving us a 9-year-old Anakin, which flies in the face of everything we knew or thought we knew about Anakin Skywalker going into this, because we really didn't, right? I mean, we saw him briefly at the end of Return of the Jedi. He may have been referenced once or twice in a comic book, but we had a blank canvas, so to speak, to paint. And I think what he wanted to do, I really believe this, is he wanted to show you like the absolute purest cherub innocence, even to the point of corniness of this guy's going to grow up and be the enforcer for Palpatine and lead the Inquisitors and wipe out the Jedi throughout the galaxy. This 9-year-old kid who's really good at pod racing, but and I will say, having seen a lot of child performances and a lot of successful child performances, I'm going to say that Jake Lloyd, to me, if I was going to give a letter grade and being charitable but honest, I don't think his performance and his line readings in some of these scenes. I think it's a middle of the road B, and a couple of them are B minus. But you could say the same about Mark Hamill, couldn't you? In that first movie with his Tashi station and power, like Mark Hamill was not Edward Norton or Laurence Olivier either, and we just that was you can make all your comments you want. I have never taken Star Wars apart for its acting. I've never said, oh, this acting is wooden and horrible, nor have I said, oh, this acting is so grand, just clear off your Oscar shelves and put it on there. I think it fits the style of the B movie science fiction serials that he was trying to do, Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, and the like. I think it befits the storytelling, if you will. I don't think it goes too high, nor do I think it really dips into like amateurism. But I've seen better performances from child actors before, and I don't think Jake ruins the movie, nor do I think that I was like, my God, I want to see what he does next because he's amazing. I can't take my eyes off him. But that being said, if Lucas wants to give us a movie where it's just innocence and just radiating goodness and honesty and all of that, the problem is that we don't really get the other side of that ledger until, let's say for sure, episode 3. We don't get the pure darkness in his soul. And so when characters in here like Yoda refer to him saying, I sense fear in you and I sense darkness in you, and Obi-Wan says, the boy is dangerous, that's something that we're having to take at face value here because we haven't seen it. Like we haven't seen him at night on Tatooine, like torturing a womp rat, like just to take it apart to see how it works. Or we haven't seen him, do something that would lead us to believe that he has that capacity for evil inside of him, that it just needs to be stirred and manipulated and so forth. So I'm okay with a 9-year-old Anakin. The thing is, though, if that's the point you want to make, that even this innocent, pure being can be corrupted by the dark side and turned into something malevolent and overpowering, then the overpowering really has to come through on a strong way. You're like, because then you're emotionally attached. You say, no, Anakin, don't make those choices. Don't choke Padme. Don't turn on Obi-Wan. And I think that does come through in episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, to a degree. But we had to wait 5 or 6 years to get there. And so in only dealing with this film now, we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what future installments are going to give us. We have the benefit of hindsight now. But at the time, we're asking ourselves, like, wait a minute, this is Darth Vader? Like, it didn't quite equate in our heads what we imagined this might to be. I mean, we might have imagined Anakin to be that sullen teenager Power Ranger type riding a speeder through Mos Espa, a candy-colored speeder, maybe red, maybe green. Maybe that's how we thought, smoking a death stick, trying to sneak into a cantina to get served. I mean,
but
some of us might have thought.
The question is Anakin on the opposite path of Luke Skywalker? Because Luke is kind of a bratty teenage,
wastrel,
really gray in terms of his Force compass. Like, do you see him as this guy's going to be a Jedi? This guy is going to be Obi-Wan's star student. That's going to be the future of the Force. And we really don't see that until Return of the Jedi. So is Anakin on the complete reverse path?
But we see, and that's why when people give Hayden Christensen a tough time for 2 and 3, I think they're completely off base because he's playing the bratty, still growing up teenage kid that doesn't understand what he can really do, but thinks he's more, thinks he can do all these things, but he wants to go from here I am to I can do it all, and he doesn't understand what's in between. That's Luke Skywalker. He goes from, oh yeah, I've got these powers, right? When he leaves Dagobah, he leaves going, I can handle it, in a sense. He's like, I can handle this. No, you can't. and you went A to Z and you didn't do B, C, D. You didn't do everything in between. Like you're going and you haven't had the training, and that's why you're susceptible. And to me, Hayden Christensen pulls off the bratty side of it too. Like, hey, I know everything and I can handle this, and he can't. And that's why I still say if you make episode 2, episode 1, and episode 3, episode 2, and then episode 3 is Vader going out there and hunting down the Jedi and taking all of them out besides Kenobi, which again, I feel like that line's been destroyed when he's, the Jedi are all but extinct. Well, there sure seemed to be a lot that made it. I mean, from what we've seen post Return of the Jedi, right? But anyway, we can argue that at another point. But I guess I'm going to your point, Urza, which is, yes, I think Luke, they are on two different paths. And I think when you take what happened in the original series with Luke and you look at what Hayden Christensen did, to me, it's almost perfect. Because they're
now,
both
can I make you two hate me for 2 minutes?
I hate you anyway. Don't worry about it. So go ahead.
There's even a third journey that in your beloved sequel trilogy that I think is exciting that we'll talk about when we get there. But the idea that, yes, there is. The idea that Ben Solo actually is terrified of making that choice of giving himself over to one side, but it's not the light. He has fully embraced the darkness. At least that's his journey. And he is terrified of the light penetrating that, which is what leads him to actually slay his father. And that is a completely different journey than Luke or Anakin went on, even though those two, I mean, and it's, if you really start to wrap your head around it, it's wild. He's like, I know what I have to do, but I'm afraid to do it. And it's that he wants to be in the dark side, not the light. And so that to me, like I said, you can play around a lot with these things and the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell. But yes, there are more than one paths to redemption or to the end, and that's kind of where we find ourselves. We should mention. Go ahead.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I know we're going forward, even though we're starting with this. So hey, everyone, here's what you have in store when we talk about the movies. If Kylo Ren is the person that worships Darth Vader the entire time, but wants to be more than Darth Vader was, because Darth Vader was redeemable, you make that character, which I felt like they were starting to do in Force Awakens. They were going to make him almost the ultimate bad guy, because he wouldn't have had a redemption arc. He was just going to be evil, because he was, like he said, what did he say? Like, I'm going to continue what you started, or I'm going to finish what you started, or something like that. Well, here we go. Like, to me, at least for me personally, you've got me hook, line, and sinker. I don't, that's it. But then we have another redemption arc. We play it all over again. That's a whole nother story. Go ahead.
We've got to talk about this lightsaber battle simply because the fight choreography in 1999 versus how they were handling sword dueling and laser sword dueling in the late 70s, early 80s. That is not to take anything away from any of the lightsaber duels of the original trilogy. But it was clear that we had suddenly jumped into an evolutionary level in just how they were shot with the camera, how they, were choreographed and using them from jumping from multi-layers. And this lightsaber battle truly could melt your brain, as Ursa Master said. And if you walked away with nothing else, an appreciation of intergalactic economic policy, the cool Senate. I mean, for the 10 or 12 times I saw this in a theater, I always got excited when the Senate scene was coming up, because I just thought this is the neatest darn building I've ever seen inside, like with their little pods and they're floating around and yelling at each other. But this lightsaber battle with John Williams' instantly iconic Duel of the Fates, which was the standout single, if you will, from this soundtrack. Obviously, all of his work blending in old themes and new themes was towering. But Duel of the Fates, playing and intercutting, and gentlemen, the actual editing, which is something George Lucas has always emphasized, right back to the original trilogy, the crisscross cutting at the end between the lightsaber fight between Padme and her troopers storming the castle and confronting destroyer droids and battle droids and so forth, to Anakin up in his Naboo starfighter in an aerial battle, to the Gungans heroically and sometimes clumsily trying to hold off the approaching armies on the plains. You had like 4 different touch points, crisis points, and we're just going back and forth and all of that until at one point it looks like everybody's lost. Anakin's crashed, the Gungan's shield has fallen and they've been taken capture. Qui-Gon's got a hole in him. The Natalie, Princess Amidala, and her guard have been captured. Like, there's literally a moment where you're like, wait a minute, everyone can't lose, right? And then within the course of the Force, suddenly roles are reversed. Triumph is snatched from the jaws of defeat, and you have a grand slam bang ending that is truly befitting of the saga. So, your thoughts, gentlemen, on just that last 20 to 25 minutes?
Real quick. Too bad there wasn't a back to tank around, because we'd still have Qui-Gon, because that obviously is the plot saver for everything. Anyway, Urza, go ahead and now.
Yeah, or too bad Qui-Gon wasn't like 3 inches to the left like Sabine Wren. I loved it. To be honest, the finish of this movie was fantastic, minus Jake Lloyd going woohoo. I just wanted him to just eject into space at that point. But don't get me wrong, like R2 being in the starfighter, building that relationship with the Skywalker. The only thing is like R2 should remember all this stuff and just conveniently never brings it up. Like that started to bug me by the end of the movie. But like everything was awesome. The editing was great. That Duel of the Fates fight is iconic. That saved this movie. Like even the Gungan battle was good. Yeah, I mean, you take Jar Jar and the goofy shit out of it, like it was a good like war battle. You always wondered what ground troops in Star Wars would look like. It was cool. Like I love those giant tanks, and the battle droids, as goofy as they were kind of rad. Like the big blue ball things that they threw and the giant shield, and kind of it was like a Neo Ewok battle, but it was a little more believable than Ewoks. So I was like, all right, this is get it, okay. Even that was all right. The whole like, I think you could view it kind of like the Sand People on Tatooine, the Gungans, and the Naboo. Like there's a little touch of racial tones there that I think is a little uncomfortable in a modern lens. But I think they did their best to kind of rehab that situation at the end of the movie, where the Naboo were like, no, we should coexist. You shouldn't feel like you need to hide and feel ostracized because you're not, cognitively the same as we are. We're 2 races that share the same planet. I'm like, that actually is really cool to me. Looking back as an adult, as a kid, I didn't get it. But that, like, the messaging there was cool. That fight where Obi-Wan jumps up and slices Darth Maul in half is so effing cool. Even today, when I rewatch this movie, I remember the last time I watched it was a while ago now, like 10 years or so. The rest of the movie, I was, I'm making a sandwich or popping popcorn or, refilling my beverage through most of the movie. But you don't leave your seat when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are like, we'll handle this. From right there, it's got you. And that's like, I know Celia Moss has thoughts, but that's something I'm going to heavily take into account when I bestow it a lightsaber color, because without that, I don't know that this movie earns the same rating that I'm going to give it.
That sounds like a heck of a transition to our
We're not,
lightsaber
because
rating.
I'm going to go ahead and talk real quick now too.
Oh.
So when it comes to lightsaber battles, I think we see the progress from even with A New Hope, right? It gets a little bit better in Empire. It's a little bit better in Return of the Jedi. I think when they bring in Ray Park, he's a martial artist, and that obviously ups the ante. And you're 100% right, Urza Master, because I was going to say this lightsaber battle completely saves the movie. It also sets a precedent that all the battles going forward are going to be these crazy dueling fighting. Because I almost feel like if you look at A New Hope, it almost reminds me of the way knights probably fought, because the swords were so heavy and you only really kind of got maybe one or two swings that would happen, very arching, right? And then we see that change, and then obviously with Phantom Menace, it's like again completely off the charts. I, I almost felt like they wasted the character to have, to have him die. I felt like it was a waste. I almost would have liked to have seen, him
Oh,
carry over in the other movies. I know we're going to
that's
see him.
that's
We're
a
going to see,
Lucas bugaboo. He
right?
always introduces a villain and then snaps it off. So
Yeah, he
it's
gone.
very prominent in this new trilogy. Darth Maul, he's gone
Yeah,
by the credits.
it,
Jango Fett, gone by the credits. General Grievous, he's gone halfway through the picture. Like he'll introduce a cool new villain and he'll be like, you've been focusing on the wrong stuff.
and even
And
Ray
then
Park though I'm going to compare him to Pedro Pascal just a little bit, but Ray Park, it's not his lines, it's his facial expressions. When he's waiting for that shield to change to get a Qui-Gon, the look on his face was like you could feel the dark side,
Yeah.
and which was absolutely incredible. Where I'm watching the last episode of Book of Boba Fett today, and I know whatever, and it's towards the end, and it's Mando and Grogu's like tapping on the glass with the ball, and Pedro Pascal's voice is perfect. He's like, no, no, I told you no. I mean, just his voice to me reminded me of, Ray Park with his facial expressions. So I think the one good thing to come out of this is we get this precedence that lightsaber battles going forward. Now, kind of stinks because I haven't seen any force running since this movie, in a sense. But I
Yeah, where
always
was
thought,
that at the end of the movie, by the way?
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, just force run everywhere. But so anyway, all right, silly moss, I had to throw that in there.
no, that was great. That was great. So, but that, like I said, that Lucas, that's something that all fans have gotten mad at, is that he will try and hype. We all thought Jango Fett. I mean, it's Boba, but he's blue. And he ended up. We'll talk about what happens to him on Geonosis in our episode 2. But yes, he does like to quickly short circuit and subvert expectations. Only Dooku in this new trilogy made it from film 2 to film 3, and then didn't stick around very much. And Ursa Master touched on this there. The political scheming of Sidious and Palpatine, even if you don't put it together in the first 5 minutes that they're both the same person, just the idea that, okay, I'm going to start this conflict on the ground and create a catastrophe and a crisis. Then I'm going to manipulate political events in order to benefit from this. And while you still won't see exactly how my full plan will work, I've already set into motion. I'm playing the long game. And I don't know how that would read, but let's say 10 is your floor, because Ursa Master is a smart Jedi and has a lot of a high M count. But I don't know if any of that would have tracked on the 4-year-old me if I had seen this like I had seen A New Hope. I don't know if they would have been bored by it, or it would have just gone right over their heads. I can say as a 26-year-old, I was fascinated because it's all kind of right out there in the open, even though it's very much subterfuge and camouflaged. And, no one is watching the fox as he is, basically guarding the hen house here. And it just kind of makes you shudder. If anything, the transition of Sheev Palpatine to the Emperor, Darth Sidious to Emperor Palpatine, that's just as cool a transformation over 3 pictures as Anakin's fall from grace or any of the others. So,
And that brings us, as often we do on the Graying Jedi podcast, to our lightsaber ratings. And gentlemen, I think it goes without saying that this film, over the years, for us, has probably earned multiple different ratings, colored by our own opinions, society's opinion of the movie as it's waxed and waned, and now with the retrospective. Now, we have not done a viewing of the film to give it another chance, to give it some modern lens looking back, but we will do that in the future. On this episode, though, considering the last 25 years of Star Wars Episode 1, everything you felt about it, we'll kick it off with Lord Uther. What lightsaber rating or ratings do you give Star Wars Episode 1, A Phantom Menace? The Phantom Menace.
Yeah, it gets a pink lightsaber, which is not red, but it's not
Nope.
blue. I don't even know what those two color combined even come out to be. But if I could, I would just clip it right out of existence. And like I said, start with episode 2. The only thing that doesn't make this a deep red blood colored lightsaber is the acting of Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson, and Ray Park. Like them being the Jedi and the Sith, to me, completely saves the film. I'll just leave it at that. So, clip it.
I think
Maz?
I think after 25 years, I think I can recognize where the film may just come a few inches short, but also reconcile that with my love of the saga and so forth. So I think to take the Kentucky Fried Chicken promotional beverage holder featuring the Todarian of Watto, junk dealer on Tatooine on Mos Espa, I'm going to say it's a deep Toydarian blue for Phantom Menace. Like I say, there's so much good in it that even the stuff that may not have held up after 25 years, you just say, all right, there are better times ahead, and I do have a new hope for the future. So we're going to go with the KFC, which still has a sealed straw, has never actually been utilized in 25 years. This might be the season to drink deeply from Watto.
Very nice. Actually, a buddy of mine has a Jar Jar Binks one of those that he found at a thrift store. That was all gross and nasty, but it is going to be utilized this year at our big summer party in honor of 25 years of Episode 1. If it ends up in the fire at the end of the night, we'll know why. I go back to a visual aid I used earlier in our series here on the Graying Jedi. If you're not already a subscriber here at Pending Rebrand, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button, share us out, and click that like button. Drop us a comment on what you thought of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Whether you just saw it this year the first time, or have seen it in the past, have gone back, have new feelings or mixed feelings about it as I do. I have to split this up into 5 lightsaber ratings.
Oh, wow.
I start with the beginning of the film, prior to landing on Naboo, and then Naboo through till moving to Tatooine. Everything that happens on Tatooine, everything that happens after that, but before we go back to Naboo, and then the end of the movie. And I give that 5 lightsaber ratings. A blue to start the film. I thought that opening sequence with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan was great. Then it slid into the pink for me. Not terrible, but it was pretty rough. Then I'm not even going to give it a lightsaber rating for basically everything we see of Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine because Jake Lloyd is terrible. And then it still comes back into the pink, and I'm really doubting whether this movie's worth it, but it redeems itself with that end sequence and all the fighting. Darth Maul against Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon Jinn, rest in peace. I do think the trilogy suffered not having you in it. I was glad to see you back in Obi-Wan. No spoilers there. But I look forward very much to how Filoni continues to rehab these films. I look forward to the next era of Star Wars. And to all of you out there in a galaxy here, there, and far, far away, may the Force be with you. Always.
With all of you.